Welcome back. I'm Wayne Torbett, and I'm reading the second part to The Winged Warrior. Any word on Gil Insel yet? I asked Captain Price. No, Will, he replied with a sad look on his face. Yesterday I saw Lieutenant Gilbert Insel in the mess hall. He mentioned that he was scheduled to fly an afternoon patrol, and I wished him luck. I started to worry about my fellow flight member when he didn't return to the aerodrome by dark. And now, as I slowly chewed my breakfast, the hard realization that our flight may have lost a couple of good men was beginning to sink in. We would miss Gil. He was witty and always had a good joke. I finished my breakfast and was on the way back to my tent when I heard the drone of an aeroplane approaching our field. Could it be Insel? I stood and watched, saying a little prayer as the machine made its landing. As the scout got closer, a smile broke across my face. It was Insel's machine, all right. Glory be. Later, I got the whole story of what happened to him. On the afternoon of November 7th, Lieutenant Insel, with his observer, Corporal Donald, spotted a German two-seater on its way to the front. He attacked the Hun machine, forcing it to land in a farmer's field 2 or 3 miles behind the German lines. Lieutenant Insel flew over the enemy machine and dropped an incendiary bomb on it, burning it up. He headed for home once he was satisfied that he had destroyed it. His scout aeroplane was flying dangerously low as he approached the German front. As he crossed over the German trenches, he began to take a lot of ground fire. His fuel tank was hit by several bullets, and he was forced to put his kite down in a field about half a mile behind the British lines. The German artillery sent over several shells in an attempt to blow up his machine, but luckily for this RFC pilot, the German missed every time. Under cover of darkness, Insel began to patch up the holes in his fuel tank. By dawn of the next morning, he had successfully repaired his machine and took off for home. It was quite an adventure and made him our squadron's hero. Not quite 2 weeks had passed, or as the Brits say, a fortnight, when it was my turn for some excitement. Our headquarters received a telephone call from the front requesting that a German observation balloon be destroyed. It was helping the Hun artillery to send accurate fire into our trenches. Major Reese popped his head into my tent. Lieutenant Corbett, I want you to attack the sausage in the area of Arras. It is causing our lads a great deal of hardship. I've instructed the ground crew to load your scout with incendiary ammo. Please take off as soon as possible, ordered the major. It was late morning, but still quite cold. I rushed to pull on my fleece-lined boots and buttoned up my fleece-lined leather jacket. I grabbed my leather helmet and goggles as I rushed out of the tent. Sergeant Clark was waiting patiently for me as I jogged up to our Vickers gun bus. Clark climbed into the front part of the fuselage, taking up his position behind a Lewis machine gun mounted on the airplane's nose, and I climbed into the pilot's seat. I switched my engine off while the air mechanic pulled the propeller around once or twice to prime the engine. Then the mechanic shouted, "Contact!" "Contact," I replied, and switched my engine on. The mechanic pulled the propeller down with a heave, and the engine roared to life. 2 mechanics pulled the chocks away from my scout's wheels, and I taxied onto the field. I pointed the craft into the wind and sped down the field. When I reached 45 miles per hour, the scout nimbly soared into the air. I flew toward ours and spotted the tethered German sausage about 3 miles behind the enemy lines and floating at 1,500 feet altitude. I immediately put the scout into a dive. The Germans saw me coming. Machine gun fire began to stream up at me, and at the same time the balloon was being pulled down. The 2 men in the balloon's wicker basket jumped over the basket's side and floated down on parachutes. The balloon was now at about 800 feet, and I made one pass at it. Sergeant Clark opened up with his Lewis machine gun, sending incendiary bullets into the big gas bag. As we flew away, I looked back and was pleased to see the balloons suddenly become enveloped in flames. Clark turned towards me and gave the thumbs up sign. We bagged our first sausage. During the flight back to our aerodrome, I thought about how the German balloon observers had floated down to safety in parachutes. I envied them. The Royal Flying Corps pilots were not allowed to wear parachutes because of two reasons. First, the general staff believed that every time a pilot got into a tight corner, he would jump to safety. Secondly, it was considered too much extra weight, and so we had to fly with no parachutes. A welcoming committee was waiting for us when we landed. We hopped down from our craft and were surrounded by well-wishers. Lieutenant Corbett and Sergeant Clark, I wish to congratulate both on your first confirmed victory. I received a telephone call from the front describing how you bravely dived on the enemy sausage in spite of protective fire from enemy machine gun nests. Our front line observers said you flamed it. Well done, chaps, said Major Lionel Rees. The rest of the day I was asked over and over again to describe my attack on the German balloon. It was fun being the center of attention. I was so keyed up from the day's events that I had trouble falling to sleep that night, and when sleep finally came, I dreamed of flying. In my dream was an eagle soaring high on air currents. It spotted a black raven flying below. The eagle dived to attack the raven. The eagle sank its talons into the black bird, and at that moment I woke with a start. Was this just another stupid dream, or did it have any meaning? I rolled over and drifted back to sleep. In the first week of December, the weather turned very inclement. Northern France was socked in by heavy clouds and cold rain, sleet, and hail. Our squadron commander ordered all aeroplanes grounded. He gave our sea flight a 3-day pass, and I was happy to get away from the war for a change. I've always wanted to see Paris. Does anybody want to go with me to see the Eiffel Tower and Notre Dame? I asked Captain Price and Lieutenant Libby. No thanks, Will. I've seen Paris before, replied the captain. I have a wife in Norwich, but a 3-day pass simply isn't enough time for me to get home, see her, and get back. And I'm not really interested in seeing Paris again. No, I'll just curl up with a good book and a nice cup of tea. I'll go with you, said Fred Libby. Wonderful. We will be 2 Yanks in Paris. Fred and I rode the train to Paris, arriving around noon. The sky was slate gray with a light drizzle coming down when we left the railroad station. We decided to take the Parisian subway to the Eiffel Tower. The subway, the French called it the metro, was a wonderful way to travel around Paris. The French built it a few years before the Great War began, and it was not only fast, it was clean and quiet. As we emerged from the subway, we were overcome with awe at seeing the most famous landmark in Europe. There it was, the Eiffel Tower. It was even taller than I imagined. Since 1889, it has been the tallest building in the world. We purchased our tickets and had to decide whether to ride the elevator up or walk up the stairs. What do you say we walk up the stairs? It'll be a feather in our cap to have climbed the Eiffel Tower, suggested Fred. Okay, let's go, I agreed. I counted the steps to the second observation platform. It was just over 700 steps, and my legs felt like lead by the time we finished the climb. But wow, the view from the second platform was amazing. Will, look over there. That's the Arc de Triomphe, Napoleon's monument to honor the French military. After we leave the Eiffel Tower, why don't we visit Napoleon's tomb? I've heard that he is buried in the Hotel des Invalides, I commented. Swell, that's a grand idea, said Fred. I spotted a policeman standing near the door of the observation restaurant and asked him, Napoleon, Hotel des Invalides? He saw our British uniforms and smiled. He took us to the rail and pointed down at a dome building about 2 blocks away. Merci, I thanked him and gave him a salute. The Hotel des Invalides was a royal church built during the 17th century. During the Napoleonic Wars, it became an army hospital, thus the name. Now it was a museum and the final resting place for Napoleon Bonaparte. When we entered the central hall, directly under the great dome, we saw a large red marble tomb. With great reverence, we approached it. Here lays the remains of the greatest military leader in modern history, I thought. We spent over an hour studying the many military items on display in the museum. It was all very interesting, but my stomach began to rumble. Fred, why don't we find a nice cafe and get something to eat? I suggested. We walked up the Boulevard Saint Germain, heading into the heart of the student section of Paris. We soon came upon a good-looking cafe by the name of Les Deux Margots. There were lots of empty tables and chairs on the sidewalk just outside the cafe, but considering the weather, it was not surprising. We ducked in. Bonjour, we were greeted by a stout man with a friendly face. Good day, I replied. Ah, I see you are English, he said with a slight accent. My name is Auguste Bollé, and I welcome you to my cafe. We found an empty table and took a seat. There were two lovely statues of Chinamen on the wall, and I admired the fine artwork in each one. I knew just enough French to know that les deux means the two, and I suppose Margot means statues, I said to Fred. A waiter came over and we ordered onion soup, crepes, and a glass of red wine. During conversation with my fellow airmen, I noticed two young ladies sitting at a nearby table. They looked to be about my age, and one of them, with dark brown eyes, kept glancing my way. Feeling rather brave, I said to my friend, why don't we introduce ourselves to the mademoiselles? Sure, agreed Fred. We walked over and I said, hello, my name is Will, and this is Fred. May we sit with you? They both gave a little giggle, and one of them said, oui. We took a seat. Do you speak any English? I asked. The one that kept looking at me said she could speak English. She said they were university students. She introduced herself as Michelle, and her friend's name was Yvonne. I told her that this was my first visit to Paris, and when I explained that we were both military flyers, I noticed how her eyes lit up. Notre Dame, have you seen it? She said. No, we haven't seen the famous cathedral yet, I replied. Perhaps I could show it to you, she asked. Gosh, that would be wonderful, I said. As soon as we finished our meal, we paid the waiter, and all four of us exited the cafe. The sky was still overcast, and there was a cold, brisk wind blowing, but at least the drizzle had stopped. Being the gentleman that I am, I offered my arm to Michelle, and she entwined her arm with mine. We strolled to the left bank of the Seine and admired the view of the Gothic cathedral, Notre Dame. We crossed over a bridge to the Isle de la Cité, the very heart of Paris. The bridge is called Petit Pont, or Little Bridge, explained Michelle. Soon the four of us were standing in front of the cathedral. Pointing up, I commented, that rose window is extremely beautiful. Will, can you see the gargoyles up there? Asked Fred. Yes, they look scary. I wonder if we can climb up the tower to get a close look at them. Too late, the towers are closed for the day, replied Michelle. I wasn't too surprised at this, since it was beginning to get dark. Michelle, my friend and I need to find a hotel to spend the night. Do you know of a good but cheap one? I asked. Oui, in the Latin Quarter, across from Notre Dame, is the Esmeralda. I thought about the hotel's name for a second. The hotel, is it named for the gypsy girl in the novel The Hunchback of Notre Dame? I asked. Oui. Is that not a beautiful name? asked Michel. Fred and I walked the young ladies to their student apartment. We all agreed to meet again in the morning for breakfast at a cafe around the corner from where they lived. The next morning I looked out of my window at a marvelous sight. I had a beautiful view of the Gothic cathedral, and as a bonus I could see patches of blue in the sky. The weather was improving, and with a little luck we might see some sunshine today. It looks like the stormy weather is over. I think we should get back to the aerodrome this afternoon, said Fred. Frederick Libby grew up on a ranch in Colorado. He had been a cowboy before joining the Royal Flying Corps and was considered the best shot of any observer in the squadron. And another thing about Fred, he loved the adventure of flying, so it was not hard to understand him wanting to get back into the aerodrome. Okay, Fred, but remember we have an appointment with two lovely ladies this morning, I said with a wink. The four of us met at the cafe. We had an enjoyable breakfast of croissants and coffee. Michel ordered a pain de chocolat, which is chocolate-filled pastry that looked delicious. Yvonne looked from Fred to Michel and said something in French. Yvonne has classes today. Her first is 1 hour, explained Michel, so after the breakfast, she must say au revoir. What about you? Do you have any classes? I asked. I have classes in the afternoon, she replied. If you like, in the morning, I can show you Paris. We saw the Eiffel Tower yesterday, but I would love to see the famous Arc de Triomphe, I said, and then finished off my coffee. Oui, then we can go, said Michel. And so, with Michel as our guide, we strolled along the left bank of the Seine. We soon came to the beautiful Pont Alexander. I was impressed with the gilded winged horses on the top of the pillars that anchored the single-span bridge across the river. The Tsar of Russia made France and Russia allies, and so the bridge is named for him, explained Michel. Soon we were on the broad Avenue des Champs-Élysées. Michel took us into the Jardin des Champs-Élysées, where the three of us found a vacant bench to sit on. Michel sat between Fred and me. We had a nice view of an exquisite fountain as we sat and talked. I told Michel I was from Florida, the land of alligators, and Fred joked about being a cowboy from the Old West. She laughed. Where are you from? I asked. My family owns a vineyard 10 kilometers south of Rennes. We make champagne, Rennes is not far from the front. I worry about Mama and Papa and my brother Auguste, who is fighting in the French army. Yes, General Sherman once said that our Civil War is hell. And this great war is indeed a horror. I pray that nothing happens to your family, especially your brother. I said this and placed my hand on hers. Michel smiled and said, Merci. Well, the morning is going by too fast. I guess we need to start walking towards the Arc de Triomphe, said Fred. We started strolling down the broad avenue towards the famous arch. Michel and I walked hand in hand. Michel, is there a good restaurant nearby? I asked. Oui, the Zibion is on Rue Pierre Charon, just around the corner, and it serves an excellent Lagnu. How you say lamb? Yep, that sounds great, said Fred, licking his lips. We decided to visit the Arc de Triomphe before taking our lunch at the restaurant. And as we approached the Arch of Triumph, I was impressed with the size and grandeur of the monument. Wow, that thing is huge, I said. The arch is 50 meters tall. Around the top are shields, and each has the name of a famous Napoleonic victory. Victory parades begin here and march down the Champs-Élysées, explained Michel. The three gazed up at the mammoth arch. I love the high relief artwork on the right side. What is it? I asked. That is the French volunteers leaving to defend France, she replied. Is it not beautiful? We headed back down the wide avenue to the restaurant. Michelle ordered grilled goat cheese on a leafy salad. Fred had a leg of lamb, and I ordered cod fish cakes with broad beans. The food was delicious. The conversation was entertaining, but most of all, it was good to get away from the war. We finished up our meal. I wrote down my mailing address on a piece of paper and handed it to Michelle. Please write me. The only letters I get during mail call are from my dear mother, I said, and a letter from you would brighten my day. Michelle smiled and said, Oui, mon ami. Now I must go. I have a class in half an hour. There was a bus stop nearby, and she only had to wait a couple of minutes before the bus came. She hopped on the bus and took a seat next to a window facing us. Fred and I waved goodbye to her, and she blew me a kiss. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my second part of my story.